Welcome once again to a comprehensive history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Today we will be talking about 2005, a year responsible for one of the most popular formats in the game's history. 2005 would begin with a whimper rather than a boom as we saw the release of the first structure decks, Structure Deck Zombie Madness and Structure Deck Dragon's Roar. Unlike the starter decks of previous years, structure decks would stick to a specific theme. Neither of these first two structure decks were considered very powerful. In fact, Dragon's Roar was a complete flop. Zombie Madness, on the other hand, would give players easy access to some decently strong cards. They may not have made the greatest first impression, but eventually structure decks would become one of the biggest game changers out there. A year one for Invasion of Chaos, March would continue to be the month of big hitters as we got Flaming Eternity. This set was a massive improvement over Soul of the Duelist and Rise of Destiny. The pack contained the first lineup of cards that would come to see play for years to come. While not quite as broken as the card that would inspire it, Deck Devastation Virus would still give you a huge advantage over your opponent if you could get it off. As a level 8 fusion monster, Gatling Dragon would be a popular metamorphosis target. Felix Ring Wind Blast would power creep the likes of Raigeki Break by putting your opponent's cards on the top of their deck instead of the graveyard. Putting your opponent's cards where they can draw them back may not seem that good, but against tribute decks such as Monarchs it was devastating and would kill your opponent's hands. Rescue Cat had the extremely powerful effect where it could tribute itself to special summon 2 low-level beast monsters from your deck. With the anything goes nature of this game's card pool, it was only a matter of time before this became absolutely broken. Armed Samurai Benkei was the type of card you could build an entire deck around, and we will see an example of such a deck later in this video. Lightning Vortex was designed to be a weaker version of Raigeki after it had been banned the previous year. Even so, this card still had a very powerful effect where you could discard one card from your hand to destroy all face-up monsters your opponent controlled. Sacred Felix of Nephis was the cover card of Flaming Eternity, and it had one hell of a good effect. If this card is destroyed by card effect, special summon this card during your standby phase. If special summon this way, destroy all spell and trap cards on the field. This thing was like Vampire Lord on steroids. Having a 2400 attack beat stick that could revive itself was one thing, but being able to destroy your opponent's back row on top of that was absolutely insane. Players would quickly discover just how powerful this card was. Depending on how you look at it, Swords of Concealing Light was either a stronger or weaker version of Swords of Revealing Light. Swords of Revealing Light would flip monsters face up and prevent them from attacking for 3 turns. Swords of Concealing Light would instead flip monsters face down and prevent them from changing their position for 2 turns. In a vacuum, Concealing Light was the weaker card, but in reality it would go on to see play far longer than Revealing Light ever did. The Monarch family would see a new addition in the form of Grandmog. Grandmog wasn't a bad card, it's just it didn't do anything the pre-existing Monarchs couldn't already do. Finally, we would see the addition of one of the game's most notorious stall cards in the form of Threatening Roar. Your opponent cannot declare an attack during this turn. That's it, that's the card. Just make sure you activate it before your opponent declares, otherwise it's not stopping anything. February would see the release of yet another Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship video game. Yu-Gi-Oh! 7 Trials to Glory World Championship Tournament 2005. Much like last year's release, this game once again expanded the card pool ready for the 2005 World Championship. On top of that, the game included a copy of Mind Control, a card designed to be a powered down version of Change of Heart. Even so, it was still a pretty powerful card, and currently sits on the limited list today. April 2005 would bring about that year's first update to the Forbidden Unlimited list. The Forceful Sentry, Painful Choice, Change of Heart, Magical Scientist, Fiber Jar, Mercuria the Destructor, Mirage of Nightmare, Confiscation, and Butterfly Dagger Elmer would all be banned. Sacred Felix of Nephis, Lightning Vortex, and Deck Devastation Fires would all immediately go to 1. Semi-Limited would see a huge shuffle. Morphing Jar went back to 1, whilst Emergency Provisions, Good Goblin Housekeeping, Level Limit Area A, Dark Scorpion Chick the Yellow, Night Assailant, Gravity Bind, Abyss Soldier, Upstart Goblin, and Vampire Lord all went to 2. Finally, Morphing Jar number 2 would be released from the list altogether, because it simply wasn't relevant. This list would give the game a big shake-up, and signal the beginning of one of the most beloved eras in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. April 2005 would give us GOAT format, widely considered one of the greatest formats ever made. A format named such thanks to the heavy use of the card Scapegoat. The Metamorphosis Thousand Eyes Restrict combo would see GOAT Control become the top deck of the format. Despite its namesake, GOAT format was a very diverse meta, and it is still played today by a growing community of competitive and skilled players. So you may be asking, what makes this format in particular so special? Well, for one, it's nostalgic. People like to turn for it when they're looking for that old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Fix. It's easy to comprehend too, as many of the cards have short and basic effects. The only extra deck monster type available are fusion monsters. Synchro, Exceed, Pendulum, and Link cards did not exist yet. The format also has a reputation for rewarding players with solid fundamentals and strong long-term decision making. The timing of your plays matters just as much as the plays themselves, if not more so, as your decisions can easily come back to bite you later on. The GOAT Control mirror match itself is considered one of the most decision heavy in the game. Players will need to outthink their opponents just as much as they will need to outplay them. These cards are old, and many of them don't even see play anymore due to power creep or banning. With how popular Yu-Gi-Oh! Was in the early 2000s, there's a good chance you already own many of the cards you need to play. It's a really cheap format. Finally, it is a diverse format where GOAT Control has plenty to rival it. Chaos is a popular alternative to GOAT, and many now consider it to be the best deck in the format. Animal-themed decks such as Beast Beatdown are able to run over your opponent's monsters and deal piercing damage. Combo decks such as Reasoning Gate can push for one-turn kills and bring duels to a swift end. Anti-meta decks such as Warriors have the utility to out almost anything, and are among some of GOAT's worst matchups. Over 15 years have passed since the genesis of GOAT format, and yet it still continues to evolve even to this day. GOAT format would further grow that summer with the release of the Lost Millennium. The Lost Millennium would mark the beginning of the GX era as it introduced new archetypes such as Ancient Gears and Elemental Heroes. In terms of meta relevance, the best cards in this set were easily Brain Control, with its ability to steal your opponent's monsters, and DD Survivor, with its ability to hard counter the popular Nobleman of Crossout and DD Warrior Lady. The Lost Millennium would be the final set released before the 2005 World Championship. Releasing alongside the Lost Millennium was Tournament Pack 6. Toon Table of Contents has gone on to be played in more combo decks than actual Toon decks. This is because the card could search additional copies of itself, something the likes of Reinforcement of the Army couldn't do. The popular strategy with this was to play 3 copies in your deck alongside Toon World or a Toon Monster. Playing it essentially allowed you to remove 3 cards from your deck, something that was very useful in strategies that needed to burn through their cards quickly. GOAT Control variants would go from strength to strength throughout the format, winning multiple Shonen Jump championships, including Los Angeles, Houston, and Charlotte. The Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship would roll around once again in August. This time, however, the venue would be in Japan and not America. As always, the World Championship was split up into 2 tournaments, one for the trading card game, and another for the World Championship games on Game Boy. I just want to take a moment to appreciate the visual of all those people sat in one room, their Game Boy Advances linked together by a cable. It's the kind of thing you simply don't see anymore. Video games sure have evolved fast. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that ever again. As always, links to the full video can be found in the description. The 2005 World Championship would very much be the GOAT format tournament. There was very little difference between the TCG and OCG Forbidden Unlimited lists. This similarity in metagames may be able to explain why Westerners were much more successful this time around, as first place would be taken by Greek player Miltiades Markow. Markow would be the first non-Asian Yu-Gi-Oh! World Champion, and he would do it with a Sacred Felix GOAT control variant that would take everyone by surprise. Hand of Nephis alongside monster stealing cards like Brain Controller and Enemy Controller would help turbo out the Sacred Felix. Once the Felix was out, it'd be difficult to get rid of, allowing Markow to control the pace. This turbo strategy would further be boosted by the inclusion of Apprentice Magician, who could retrieve both Hand of Nephis and Magician of Faith on the deck. Outside of the Sacred Felix combos, the card selection was pretty typical of a GOAT control deck. Delinquent Duo, Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity would make up the trinity, while Scapegoat and Metamorphosis would be used together to bring out the Thousand Eyes Restrict. For the side deck, Markow would get hella spicy, as Elephant Statue of Disaster would burn your opponent if they discarded it from your hand. In second place, we would have Mexican representative Jorge Fabian Pina Lizarraga and his Empty Jar deck. Empty Jar was a deck that aimed to do two things and two things only: deck your opponent out, and do it as quickly as humanly possible. This deck has a reputation of being something of a no-skill deck, but in 2004 you had to be good at counting your cards, otherwise you risked decking out yourself. Fast forward 1 year however, and the tables had completely turned, thanks to the release of a little thing called Serial Spell. Serial Spell would allow you to resolve the effect of a spell card twice by discarding your entire hand as cost. In the case of Empty Jar, this allowed the player to activate card destruction twice without needing to draw any additional cards from their deck. The release of Serial Spell made Empty Jar extremely consistent almost overnight. The side deck has unfortunately been lost to history, but that's fine, because it's this main deck strategy that matters. Last but not least, the bronze medal would go to David Kretschmer from Germany, making this the first Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship where an Asian player did not make the top 3. Despite taking place in Japan, the tournament's top 8 would contain only one Japanese player. Like the 2 players above him, Kretschmer would also surprise everyone with his deck choice, as he entered the tournament with a Machine Beatdown deck. The deck would contain no Metamorphosis, no Scapegoat, and no Fusion monsters, going against the grain of the GOAT format. Whereas GOAT decks focused on controlling the field, and Empty Jar focused on emptying the decks, Machine Beatdown focused on OTKing with limiter removal. Although Mechanical Chaser was the stronger machine monster, X-Head Cannon was chosen for its light attribute. The Kochi, the Battle Charge Locomotive, was also utilised thanks to its deck thinning potential and ability to be food for Blackluster Soldier. In the side deck, we'd see a complete change in strategy. Kretschmer would side out his Machine Beatdown strategy, and would switch to a Stall Burn strategy including the likes of Spirit Reaper, Stealth Bird, Wave Motion Cannon, and Messenger of Peace. For the quote-unquote GOAT format World Championship, this was quite the unexpected top 3. And so came the end of the 2005 World Championship, and with it, the end of GOAT format, as Yu-Gi-Oh! Was about to be changed forever with the release of Cybernetic Revolution on August 17, 2005. Only one thing needs to be said about this set. Cyber Dragon completely flipped the game on its head. It would be the chase card, as the rest of the set was seemingly designed around it. Power Bond would allow you to fuse your Cyber Dragons into a Cyber Trin or Cyber End Dragon while doubling their attack. System Down would banish machine monsters from the field or graveyard, and Fusion Recovery would allow you to retrieve your polymerizations from the graveyard. While not the focus of the set, Elemental heroes would also receive a nice boost in the form of Elemental Hero Bubble Man and Miracle Fusion. September 1st would also see the release of the 2005 Tim promos, the most significant of which being Exarion Universe. Its incredibly high stat spread, combined with its ability to deal piercing battle damage, would be the final nail in the coffin for Goat Control. Goat Control had one last early meta hurrah at Shonen Jump Boston, but the writing was on the wall. If the ban list didn't kill it, developments in the game eventually would have, as the meta began to move in favour of cards such as Cyber Dragon and Chaos Sorcerer. With Goat Control dead, the October 2005 Forbidden and Limited list would bury it for good, as we saw the bannings of Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning, Sinister Serpent, Tribe Infecting Virus, the Trinity, Mirror Force, and Ring of Destruction. Goat Control staples such as Tsukiyomi, Thousand Eyes Restrict, Metamorphoses, Book of Moon, Scapegoat, Magician of Faith, and Nobleman of Crossout would all go to Limited. The other two top decks from the World Championship would also see a hit, with Book of Tayo and Limiter removal going to 1. Night Assailant would be limited thanks to its ability to loop and retrieve cards with its effect, and finally Dark Hole and Confiscation would see themselves unbanned. Dark Scorpion Chick the Yellow, Vampire Lord, and Marauding Captain would come off the list altogether. It's fair to say that this was a significantly game-changing ban list, and Pot of Greed has not been seen in competitive play since. October that year would see some new structure deck releases, with Warrior's Triumph containing the Fine Sword Felix Blade. This card had the effect where you could equip it to a warrior type monster to increase its attack by 300 points, and if it was in the graveyard during your main phase, you could remove 2 warrior type monsters in your graveyard from play to add it back to your hand. With the likes of Return from the Different Dimension and Dimension Fusion sitting at 3, it would not be long before we saw this utilised in combo decks. This isn't a card release, but it's worth talking about. November 4th, 2005 would see the release of Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. Yu-Gi-Oh! Online was a pay-to-play online matchmaking simulator, the first of its kind to be officially endorsed by Konami. Players would purchase USB sticks containing duel points. These duel points acted as credits for play. Each time you played a match, you would use 1 duel point, run out of duel points, and you'd have to go out to buy more if you wanted to play. It's not exactly the ideal way to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, but they had to start somewhere. 2005 would be rounded off with the release of Elemental Energy on November 16th. This set had a huge focus on supporting anime archetypes such as elemental heroes. Competitive cards of note in this set would be Pot of Avarice, Hydrageddon, yes, really, and the Dark World archetype. Pot of Avarice allowed you to shuffle 5 monsters from your graveyard into the deck to draw 2 new cards. As you can probably guess, it was intended as a replacement for the recently banned Pot of Greed. Hydrageddon had the battle focus effect where it summoned additional copies of itself when it destroyed an opponent's monster. Finally, Dark World was an archetype who would activate their effects when discarded to the graveyard. Low-level monsters such as Brow would have beneficial effects such as drawing additional cards, whilst higher-level monsters such as Silver would special summon themselves from the graveyard. It was certainly a change of pace and one of the first truly successful archetypes in the game. The final card of note wouldn't even be part of Elemental Energy. Exchange of the Spirit would be included as a bonus to players who took part in the Sneak Peek event. You can only activate this card by paying 1000 life points while there were 15 or more cards in your graveyard. Both players swap the cards in their graveyard with the cards in their deck. This card was immediately limited to 1 on release. The goal with this card was to fill your graveyard as much as possible before activating it. That way you would put your entire graveyard back into your deck, whilst your opponent would put their entire deck into the graveyard, giving you a guaranteed victory. Had it not been for the banning of Mercuria the Destructor, this card wouldn't have seen a release in the TCG at all, as the two together caused absolute havoc in the OCG 3 years earlier. And that's it for 2005. The modern resurgence of GOAT makes it one of the most intriguing formats in the game's history. It gives us a clue on the game's potential longevity should it ever be discontinued. It is also the only format where we can experience natural meta evolution without the outside influences of new set releases and ban lists. Close to a decade of modern play has allowed us to see radical changes in the format. Classic GOAT control has been usurped by Chaos, while combo decks have become optimized through modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Influence. It is hard to know where GOAT format will go from here, as some players consider it completely solved. Either way, GOAT format will always be around as long as there are people out there with a thirst for classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Gameplay. If you're looking for news, tournament strategies or deck lists, I'd recommend GOATformat.com, which is where I got the deck lists from their most recent GOAT format championships. Online GOAT format communities are in plentiful supply and easy to find, so don't hesitate to start today. Here's some replays demonstrating what typical GOAT format duels will look like. Enjoy!
All women are queens!
M'lady, m'lady.
This card is useless.
If she breathes, she's a god!
Oh my! Oh! Yo, you're gonna die! You are gonna die! I guarantee it!
Nope.
Jesus!